Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about raising kids who are empowered to be healthy in many ways, including the ways that they eat. We're going to delve into a unique way of thinking about eating styles in kids and why it's important to understand each child's specific needs around eating, including how things like their personality and activity level and much more play a role in that. Helping kids be healthier eaters goes way beyond just focusing on what they will or won't eat. So, to share her experiences as a mom and a nutritionist around these issues with kids, I've invited Mary Voogt on the show today. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's a nutritional therapy practitioner, feeding expert, wife, and homeschooling mom to 4 used to be selective eaters. She's the founder of Just Take a Bite and creator of the Mouth, Mind, Movement Minerals method to get kids to say to nourishing food every day. She uses a combination of nutritional therapy, eating styles profiling, EFT, and hair tissue mineral analysis to assess kids and get to the root cause of feeding challenges and create a personalized plan to overcome them. She blogs about her passion for nourishing food and empowering kids to take ownership of their health. And when she's not in the kitchen teaching her kids or working with clients, Mary enjoys reading, walking, yoga, and spending time with her family on their 10-acre hobby farm and orchard, which is not that far away from where I live. Mary is fairly local to me, so that's a wonderful thing to have her in the area. Mary, it's so great to have you today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
So we're going to delve into all things eating styles. You've got this really unique way of profiling kids and thinking about that. But let's start with the big picture of how you even got into this world of picky eating and feeding challenges to begin with, because this wasn't something that you grew up thinking that you were going to do, right?
Right. So let me start with a little story. So a few days ago, my 6-year-old came to me after dinner with a big smile on her face, and she declared, "Mom, dinner was awesome." She had just cleared her plate with seconds of short ribs, buttered rice, and roasted Brussels sprouts. Yes, Brussels sprouts.
Nice.
No mealtime drama, no interference from me, just a happy kid with a belly full of nourishing food. And that sounds like every parent's dream, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much my reality these days, but it definitely did not start that way.
Mm-hmm.
So when the same child, my daughter, she's 6 now, when she was little, she was basically born with feeding issues. So from day one, she had latching issues, food reactions, like blood in her stool. She had a tongue tie. She had clipped twice, kind of failure to thrive. It was a daily stress for both of us, daily. I mean, I was in tears almost daily. She cried daily, just trying to get her to eat. Around 9 months, we went on vacation, and I still say that was like the worst week of my life because we were away from home, and she started reacting to even more foods, like everything. She wouldn't nurse, she wouldn't eat, and it was like left and right. And I was like terrified, what do I do? I took her to the doctor, and he just looked at her and said, "She looks fine to me," and pushed us out the door. And so I was kind of on my own. She didn't gain weight for at least a year. She could go all day, without a diaper change. She was dehydrated. So around 1 year old, it was like our breaking point. I was like, either something needs to turn around or I need to take her to the hospital because I can't keep doing this. So as a last ditch effort, I made her a smoothie. And it's like the grossest smoothie I've ever made, but she hardly had any foods that she could eat. It was squash, desiccated liver, olive oil, maple syrup, and water, I think. And I said a prayer and thought maybe she'll get a few sips down. And to my amazement, she drank the whole thing. And it was like this aha moment of, we can do this. Like, I can get her nourished. And so I started with some of the smoothies and nourishing drinks. Just of the foods that she could eat. And it was often, one step forward, 2 steps back. It was a daily struggle for years. I mean, anytime she had a reaction, we were back to square one of not eating. She didn't reach 30 pounds until she was 5 years old.
Wow.
We actually had a little celebration at home. You reached 30 pounds.
Yay!
We don't like to focus on weight, but it was
Right.
a big milestone for her. So
Yeah.
it was a long journey. But now she's 6.5. She weighs over 40 pounds. She's an amazing eater. She loves to help in the kitchen. I mean, there's some meals where she even out eats me. So, it turned around. And this is just, one example. This is just one of my kids. I actually have 4 kids, and they all had different feeding challenges. So, and they were all different. Every time I went through a challenge with one of them, I thought, okay, I got this, I can do this. And then the next kid would surprise me. Nope, here's something new. And so I've kind of been through the whole gamut of everything with my kids. And then, I lived through it, and I've worked with other parents too. And it made me want to bridge this gap for parents between these feeding challenges and thriving, carefree kids. And so that's kind of what led me to become a nutritional therapy practitioner. So I can help moms do that.
It's so great, your story. I think so many of our listeners can relate to that, the emotions of that, right? Of feeling like you can't feed your kid, feeling like your child's not growing, not being nourished, and not being, dismissed when you bring them in to have that looked at, and feeling really alone. In trying to figure that out. And it is scary. Those of you who are listening who have had a child who either has a ton of reactions to foods and has very, scary experiences around food because of that, or just can't or won't eat for a variety of reasons, it is scary. And there's a lot of anxiety, as you said, on the part of the child as well as the parents. And I've always said one of the things about feeding issues that really makes them dominate our lives is we feed kids all day long, right? Feeding is something every 24 hours, we're back at it, right? Multiple times, especially with young kids. And so when there are challenges around that, it really can take over a family's life, can't it?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't even realize till much later the emotional toll, that I think it took on both of us. That it, even to the extent that when my next child was born, he had feeding issues from day one. And I feel like some of it was almost because of that.
Yeah.
Like when I was pregnant, these fears in my mind of what if it happens again? What if it happens again? And then to have that come true, it was like this.
Yeah, it's almost, I think there is very much a component of PTSD. For parents around this, in a lot of ways, including, subsequent kids. And so, we've done several episodes of the show around different aspects of feeding challenges and feeding issues. But what I love about your approach, I mean, first of all, you pull a lot of pieces into your thinking about what's going on with a kid when there's eating challenges, but you also have these really unique eating styles that you categorize kids in. And I always I find it so interesting, when I read posts that you do even around your own kids or kids that you work with. So I'd love for you to share, what are those eating styles? Let's describe each of them.
Yeah, so they're I had this mouth, mind, movement, minerals method, and the mouth component is, I help parents figure out if the mouth is functioning and send them to somebody if it's not, because if that's not working, you just can't eat. And then there's the mindset, and this I feel like is a component that so many people miss. They jump right to the food. They're like, well, they need nutrients. Let's get to the food, and that's the last part. So I love to focus on this mindset, and as I observe my own kids and observe other kids that I was working with, I saw they started to fall into these kind of categories of, all these similarities in how they eat. And so I came up with these 4 eating styles. And I kind of call it your food language, kind of like your love language.
Yeah, it's great.
Kind of how your child speaks through food. So the first one is the intuitive eater. And I call this the true picky eater. And this is the one you might have seen me highlighting lately, that this is my 6-year-old, the one that had the biggest feeding challenges. They are slow, emotional, and connected. And so this is your kid that if they're stressed or worried or scared or upset in any way, they can't eat, and they need that connection. They need to be with mom and dad or family. And Just so many things can impact, how they eat or if they'll even eat. The second one is the analytical eater. And this is a very logical child. They're still structured and bold. Everything is kind of black and white. Either I love it or I hate it. They tend to like the same foods all the time. Like, this is my routine. They're very, very structured, very routine, and I'll eat the same food all the time. And it's just, there's no black and white there. It's just yes or no. Then there's the adventurous eater, and this child is happy, animated, and curious. And my oldest and my youngest are actually adventurous eaters. And I always say this is usually the easiest child to get to eat certain foods. They love to try new things, but it's hard to get them to focus on eating. This is the kid that is so curious and just loves doing things that
all over the place.
So my oldest, she's 13, and I still, it's like, okay, let's stay here and eat, finish the meal. And my 3-year-old is the same, 2 bites, and then I want to play because, eating's boring. So they love foods, but eating's just too boring.
Yeah.
And then the last one is the active eater. And this kid is like fast, loud, and intense. They are just, go, go, go. Everything is full on. They might like spicy foods or anything they can eat super quickly. This is a kid that's going to like inhale their food and not chew. And they might have stomach aches because of it. But they're just go, go, high intensity.
Everything is like 0 to 100, like super, super big, super,
Yes. And so these are the 4 styles, and I have a little quiz on my site that you can take. It's just a few multiple choice questions, and you can figure out your child's eating style. It's justtakeabite.com/eating styles quiz. And it's just neat to kind of pinpoint where your child falls, and it gives you that new perspective on, you kind of put yourself in their shoes. And so when you see things the way they see them, it just makes sense, instead of being like, well, I think you should eat spinach. It's good for you. In their eyes, it might be, that's really slimy, or I can't get that down my throat, or that scares me, or, whatever.
Right.
And when you can understand that, you're just so much more sympathetic to that, and it changes the way you do things. So I always say, with my 6-year-old, when she was little, I say, had I known that she was an intuitive eater, it wouldn't have changed the fact that she had feeding challenges, but it definitely would have changed my mindset on how I approached it, how I handled it, and, could have saved us a lot, both a lot of stress.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying about understanding sort of those categories, or, which style they fall into. It does help us to take their perspective, because as the parent, we may have a very different style, right?
Yes.
And we tend to, in all things with our kids, make the mistake of assuming that our perception of things is the same way that they're, perceiving things, and they can be really different from us. But I also I love how you incorporate, in thinking about those styles, things beyond just what happens at the table or with food. Like you said, with the intuitive eater, these are kids who are easily overwhelmed by big feelings. These are kids who, what is going on in the background of their mind and their life shows up to the table with them and impacts their eating. And I think we don't pay enough attention to that. We tend to just divide kids into, you're a good eater, or you're a picky eater, or even, another category, maybe you have a feeding disorder, which is like a really big picky eater. And we don't think about, so we tend to just focus on what's going on with the eating or the food preferences. And I really love, what you're saying, like with the active eater, these are kids who are go, go, go. These are high intensity kids. How does that personality style, that drive to a lot of intensity and activity, how does that show up at the table with them, right? These adventurous eaters who have all kinds of curious ideas and things going on in their head that has nothing to do with food or dinner, but how does that show up at the table? And I think that's something that really a lot of parents can relate to as they're thinking about it, like, oh, yeah, so it maybe isn't just about whatever I've prepared, for lunch. There's a lot of other things showing up to the table with our kids that we need to be thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if before a meal I've had a little bit of one-on-one time with my intuitive eater and she feels a connection with me and she's calm, it doesn't matter what I'm serving, she's probably going to eat okay.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if she's been fighting with her brother and hasn't had attention, and even if I make her favorite food, she might not eat it. And then as a parent, your initial, but that's your favorite food. You love it. You always eat that, but
Yeah.
it's not about the food. That's why I say it. I do food last because it's
Yep.
often not even about the food at all.
You're talking about that relationship component that's so important for all kids, but especially like what you said about if I really just spend a little bit of one-on-one time with it, which maybe even could be in the context of cooking or preparing something, right? As you're
Absolutely.
doing, your meal prep, she's there with
Yes.
you. That relational connection soothes her nervous system so that she can come to the table feeling like she can handle whatever is going to be there, as compared to a kid who comes all stressed out or overwhelmed or dysregulated. The food thing's not going to go so well, especially not if it's something new, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yesterday before dinner, we were outside playing for a little bit. And so my daughter was having a lot of fun. And then, it's time to come in and eat. And we had soup for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And she's kind of hit and miss with soup.
Mm-hmm.
Intuitive eaters don't always like things mixed. They can be picky about textures. And she scarfed down her bowl of soup and she went and got second. She was the only one that got second.
Nice.
And I think a lot of it relates to we were outside enjoying the sun, having fun together. There was no stress before the meal. No, like we're just getting home from something, or you need to pick up your toys or get this done. It was just having fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it made such a world of difference. She was so happy at dinner and ate so well.
That's so great. And I'm thinking that probably applies, as we think about practically how we, can use some things to help these different kinds of kids. I'm thinking for an active kid too, probably spending a bunch of time outside, running around before a meal and just burning some of that energy off and getting that stimulation is probably helpful to a kid like that too, as they come to the dinner table.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yesterday before lunch, we took a walk up the street and my active eater, my 10-year-old, he was pulling the wagon with his siblings and he got to, walk next to me and talk with me. And, we got some good exercise. And then when we came to lunch, he was in a great mood and, he still scarfs down his food like usual, but in a happy way.
Yeah, kind of get some of that regulation in before coming to the table. Yes. How about
Absolutely.
for let's see, for the adventurous? So we've touched on, that sort of for the intuitive eaters, some of that one-on-one or that just being intentional about soothing relational connection before coming to the table. That's helpful for our active eaters, giving them some sensory input, some regulatory kind of physical activity. How about for the adventurous eaters who you said are sort of my mind is everywhere and I am thinking about all these things and now like, oh, food, right? What's a tip or a tool for those kinds of kiddos?
Yeah. So one thing you can do is before a meal is to let them be exploring and stuff. So give them that time to maybe do something new, get out a new toy, try a little experiment with something, let them discover something. So they've kind of, fed that curiosity. The other thing that both of my adventurous eaters love is reading at a meal. And I know some people aren't always a fan of like distracted eating, but that's enough for them to, keep their mind focused at the table because otherwise, they're gone. So if I read them a book, they will, happily eat. They don't, they're not picky or anything. They'll happily eat. It just keeps them at the table long enough to eat.
Got it. Great tip. And then which one am I missing? Intuitive, active, adventurous?
The analytical.
Analytical. All right.
Yes.
Tell us a tip or something for our analytical friends.
This one's a little trickier for me because none of my kids are analytical, but I am.
Self-analysis, right?
Yeah. So that's what's been tricky with me feeding my kids before I understood that was because I eat so differently than all of them, but I'm the one that fed them. So it was, when I learned that, I was like, oh, none of them eat the way that I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for them, they have a challenge with like trying new things, stepping outside of their comfort zone. So a good thing to do is one, to keep their routine. They're very structured and routine. So don't be like, well, we're going to eat lunch at 11 today and we're going to eat lunch at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And, you know, the spur of the moment, sporadic stuff, they're just, that's going to be very stressful. Another thing that you can try is actually letting them eat alone. They prefer the really calm, still, quiet that helps them relax. Like for me, I get up early in the morning before my family so that I can eat breakfast alone.
Yeah.
It's the only meal of the day that I like truly get to relax, you know, and don't have 4 kids hollering and stuff. So they really like that peace and quiet. So if you can either make your eating environment calmer or sometimes let them even eat alone, they might enjoy that. And then if you're going to try new foods, keep like everything the same except for maybe one thing. So it's not this overwhelming.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And I'm thinking the cafeteria environment in a school is probably an analytical eater's worst nightmare.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is for all kids. Like, I'm just so not a proponent of kids being forced to eat in the cafeteria for a lot of reasons. But as you were describing that, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Because really, as I'm hearing you talk about these 4 different styles, what we're really talking about is how to help a child regulate their unique nervous system so that they come to the experience of eating in a place where they can actually be open to the food, to the eating experience. And of course, that's going to support the physiology of eating too, right? In terms of not only how they're eating it, but also their body's ability to make use of the food.
Absolutely. Yeah. You were talking about the cafeteria and I was just thinking of myself, like when I am at a party or a restaurant, like I can't eat right. Like I eat, but like I can't feel fullness or hunger. Like my stomach is just tensed up and I know that I'm not like digesting my food because it's just, there's no, you know, my body just can't relax in that setting. So, and then, it impacts the whole rest of the process.
Totally. So you've really come to some unique understandings of this through your experience with your own 4 kids. I mean, talk about trial by fire, right? For any of us, I mean, you have kids, you have no idea what that's going to be like. We like to think we know, but then actually we discover that we don't. And they throw us challenges that we have to problem solve and figure out. And you've done such a beautiful job with that. I'm curious then for you to talk a little bit about, did your own childhood experience set you up for understanding these things? Is the way that you are having, the way that you're thinking about and raising your children similar to how you were raised, or is it quite different from your growing up experience?
Yeah. So actually it's like the complete opposite. You know, so my childhood was riddled with fear and anxiety. When I was very young, I had digestive issues. I had an overactive bladder that caused me a lot of anxiety. I had ear infections every year on antibiotics. I'm sure my gut health was a disaster. And over time, you know, these issues turned into anxiety, but I felt like I had no voice to talk about them. Like I kind of suffered in silence whenever I would say something like we were on a car trip and I had to use the bathroom. This, you know, communal, Mary has to use the bathroom. You know, it's like this, you know, I was just trying to speak up and have my needs met and everybody was like mad at me. You know, that's how it felt like I'm wrong for feeling this way or my body doing these things. And so over time, I just kind of stopped speaking up. I felt like I had no voice and I had no power, if you will. I felt like my body was kind of broken. And, you know, over time that turned into anxiety. And then as I got a little older, disordered eating, and a little older, it turned into obsessive compulsive disorder. And, you know, even into adulthood, even when I had my first couple of kids, still dealing with some of these psychological issues and a lot of the physical issues as well that I carried throughout my life. But when I was 8 years old, my mom had a nervous breakdown and she was inpatient, you know, in a mental health facility. And so when she came back home, it kind of made it even worse that I felt like then I couldn't be a burden to her. So beyond that, when these other things started compounding, I felt like I couldn't speak up about it. Like I didn't want to add stress to her and make it worse again. So, yeah. So growing up, I was like the opposite of an empowered child. I felt like I had no voice and I just shut down and was so quiet that like even kids in school would like literally to my face say, "Why don't you ever talk?"
Mm.
And I didn't even have an answer. Like I couldn't even speak. So now having my own kids and seeing, some of their health issues and working so hard to overcome them, it's like the complete opposite. And I think part of that is because of how I grew up, that I didn't want my kids to ever experience that. I want them to have that carefree childhood that I longed for, but I didn't have. So that has kind of become my mission, is to empower kids to speak up and have that voice, and that they can feel good, that they can feel like, healthy kids, and they don't have to have all these, childhood diseases that there are these days. That doesn't have to be their destiny. And even if, their parents aren't, don't get it all. Like I want kids to be empowered because, that's just so important for them to start that at an early age.
Thank you for sharing that. I think so often our personal stories are so connected with the work that we end up doing. And that's, your story is a really beautiful example of that. And the commitment that you have to reflecting on your growing up years, on what that experience was like, and saying, I want this to be different for my kids. But even more broadly now as a professional mission, I want this to be different for all kids, right?
Yes.
And I'm curious, it sounds like to me that the nutrition piece of things, the healthy eating, the knowledge or awareness of how food impacts brain function, physical health, doesn't sound like that was something that you grew up having embedded in you. That's something that you've discovered and learned then as you've done your own healing work and working with your kids, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like I said, even when I had my first child, like I still didn't understand anything about nutrition, and we went through fertility treatments. My body was just so dysfunctional at that point. And then, it wasn't until I think I was trying to get pregnant a second time, and we went through 7 rounds of IVF, and I was like, there has to be something different. Like, this can't be all there is, but the doctors don't, give you anything else. And so I started searching, and that kind of catapulted things.
I so appreciate you sharing that, because I think so many of the moms listening can relate to that. And I think the sharing of our stories, there's power in that. There's power in the sharing and in giving that story a voice. But there's also power in the community around that, right? Like so many moms who are listening right now going, man, I feel that deeply. Like that was my story. This is, boy, I had those fertility issues, and to open people's awareness to maybe some options or some ideas that they weren't aware of before, I think is such a powerful mission. And so thank you for being open about that. I think that's important.
Yeah. And I do want to share with people, if people are struggling with infertility, like I said, from the time I was 13, cycles were not normal. And I was diagnosed at one point with a form of PCOS. And like I said, we did 7 rounds of IVF for our first 2 kids. But through, psychological work and physical work, that our last 2 were conceived naturally.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a testament to that. That's great. I want to just spend a few minutes here talking about the minerals piece of this, because I think that is so important, so often overlooked. We could do an entire episode just on the mineral components of eating, but again, in the vein of just raising people's awareness, you talked about the mouth pieces of making sure that the child's oral structure is working properly. Do they have a tongue tie? Is the, oral motor strength where it needs to be, all of that? And then we really spent a good amount of time talking about the mindset and understanding those styles. But let's just touch on the minerals piece. How did it first come on your radar? And probably it was with your own kids, the mineral connection with that.
Yeah. So it was actually when my intuitive eater, when she was like a year old, and I was like, I know we're so, both of us, she was nursing. So whatever she couldn't eat, I couldn't eat.
Yep.
And I was like, I know we're both so malnourished. I was having heart palpitations every day from anxiety. Like I was just a mess, I was like, I need something.
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard about a practitioner, an NTP, that does hair tissue mineral analysis. And so I went to her and I was just like, we need help. And so I did a hair test on myself. And so, and she had some great pointers, simple things that I could do, because I couldn't even take supplements or anything really, because, my daughter reacted to everything.
Let's pause just for a second. For people who aren't familiar, they might be thinking, okay, wait a second, trying to process, you did a hair test for minerals. Let's just let people know just real quick what that is, why it is that we use hair analysis for minerals in particular.
Yeah, it's just you take a little hair sample and the minerals in your hair it's like looking at a 3-month window of what's going on in your body, whereas blood is like in that moment, and your body will do anything it can to keep blood levels, stable. That's like life or death. So you could have normal blood work, but if you look at the hair, that shows what's going on at like a cellular tissue level and really gives you this good picture of minerals and heavy metals.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about minerals, just for those of you, just make sure we're all up to speed. We're talking about things like magnesium, like zinc, like iron, minerals, things that are found in the earth that are part of our foods that we need, that really play an incredibly important role in so many body functions, but also so many brain functions. And so I just thought that was worth touching on for people going, wait a second, what do you mean? You tested your hair to find out something? Because a lot of people aren't aware of that, right? Okay. So you did the hair test, you discovered some targets for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I was in this extreme slow oxidation state. My tissue calcium was like off the chart. And it was, calcium is what you use to harden concrete. I mean, it literally turns your body to concrete. I was, so slowed down. My adrenals were so run down. So then we could, target things and try to help me get back in balance. And it was hard because, like I said, we were very limited on what we could do, but there were some key things that really made a difference. And then a couple of years later, when my daughter was, maybe it wasn't even a year later, when she was 2, I tested her and I tested myself and I tested my older daughter. And I was just like, we need to start. I knew we were all, out of balance. I knew there were things going on. And so I started this journey of, doing it. And I kind of fell in love with HTMA and knew that as soon as I became a practitioner myself, that I wanted to be able to do that and offer that to parents, because it gives such in-depth, especially for kids, because it's hard to assess them. I assess based on symptoms a lot of times, but it's hard to get kids, especially little kids, to really tell you what's going on. So to have this concrete data, but it's not, you're not drawing blood or anything. And it's just, it gives you such a good picture of what's going on.
And the mineral stuff is so important, especially if we're talking about kids who do have some eating and feeding challenges. Zinc and iron are so connected to that. And so it really is important to understand what's going on there, even from the standpoint of the role that these nutrients, that these minerals play in things like driving our appetite.
Yes.
Allowing us to be aware of when we're hungry and not hungry. So I think, that's such an important piece that is often overlooked. And that's why I love the work that you're doing of bringing the knowledge and the tools from the biochemical, from the nutritional realm, along with, the strategies that we might use from a parenting or how we perceive these things. Because I think it's really the connection of those two things that is powerful. When you and I talked previously, we were talking about hydration in kids, and this ties into the minerals piece. We're talking about how kids are so often dehydrated and we don't even realize that, but the minerals play an important role with that too, right? And you talked about when you have your kids, drink water, you have sort of a mix that you have them do to keep their electrolytes well balanced, to help them really allow their cells to absorb the hydration, to really be well hydrated. Because sometimes kids can be drinking a lot of water and their hydration status still isn't good, right?
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a big push these days, for kids to drink water. And I always have mixed emotions about, kids toting a water bottle around, because I love kids to, one, listen to their own thirst, listen to their bodies and not force water down. But two, sometimes kids overhydrate because they're drinking plain water. And if you drink too much, it's just going to flush your minerals out and kind of, backfire. So yeah, I love, I have a list that I give my clients of hydrating drinks, different options. And yeah, it can be as simple as, a little squeeze of honey and a pinch of real salt added to your water. My 10-year-old the other day, I did that to him because he drinks a lot of water. He's an active eater and he tends to guzzle water. And I was like, you're drinking a lot of water, but he said he's always thirsty. And so I put some honey and salt in his drink. We hadn't done it in a little while. And he was like, whoa, like he took 2 sips and he's like, I'm not thirsty anymore.
Getting those electrolytes balanced is so critical, and giving, the things that the body needs to actually allow the water in and to do what it needs to do. So I loved that when you told me that. I was like, that's worth mentioning, because you're right. Sometimes kids are just thirsty. And it's like, well, you're drinking enough water, right? But is it getting absorbed? Is hydration actually happening? And do we have the right balance of sodium, of potassium, of all of those things that are needed to be able to make use of that? So I love that tip. And also, a lot of kids don't want to drink plain water. And so, putting a little bit of honey, a little bit of salt, like jazzing it up a little bit, not only is nutritionally helpful for them, but also maybe easier for them to get it down too.
Yeah, I like to add just like a little splash of some organic juice and then some salt. And, most kids like a little flavor in their water, and I do too. Like, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I don't like to drink plain water myself. I get hydrated, but just having that little bit of flavor, you're not like spiking blood sugar or anything, but just that little bit makes such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been such a great conversation. You've shared so many awesome insights and practical things along with your story. I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more about the work that you're doing. You've got a ton of great resources on your blog, on social media. So tell us where we can find you.
Yeah. So my blog is justtakeabite.com. I'm on Facebook, Just Take a Bite, and on Instagram at Just Take a Bite. So that's most of my social media. And then, on my site, I have a few freebies if you need help with like a dairy-free diet, because I have kids with food allergies. So I have a lot of recipes with food allergies. I have a mouth function guide, actually. So helping parents assess mouth function, since that's the first step. I love to help parents, get that direction, if you will, to just take that first step before they even work with me.
And then you've got the eating styles assessment too. Give the link to that again. We'll put all these in the show notes too, but for people who are listening and want to go there on their phone right now, what's the link to the eating styles assessment?
So that's justtakeabite.com/eating styles quiz.
Great. Perfect. I think that's so great, and really encourage everybody to go and do that again, just to have the insight and perspective. Maybe maybe you've been listening to the episode and like sort of placing your kids in categories based on what Mary's talking about. But I think go take the quiz, see if you're right. And then I'm sure in the results that you give for that, you give some additional insight into that too, which again, just, whether your kid's really picky or not, or having eating issues or not, I think it's just great. Any insights that we can have to better understand what makes our kids tick just allows us to better relate to them and better structure things in a way that's helpful. So I hope everybody goes and takes the quiz.
Yeah. And I wanted to add that it's great to do it with your kids because, like I said, I love empowering kids. So like my kids, they all know their eating style. They all understand, what kind of foods they like and why, like, what makes them tick. And they think it's the coolest thing. And they try to figure out other people's eating styles too.
I love it. That's
like
great. That's great. And what a wonderful, empowering thing to share with them, right? To embrace and to understand, oh, this is how I operate. And then as they get older, take more control with that. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah,
and then you do work with people virtually, correct?
Yes, they do.
So, people can work with you wherever they are. If they feel like, this approach is a fit and you want some more guidance, you can work with Mary virtually as well. It's great. Thank you. Thank you again for spending the time with us. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to all of you, as always, for listening. We will catch you back here next week for our next episode of the Better Behavior Show.